Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel if you're new here. My name is Dani and today I'm going to review The Final Empire by Brandon Sanderson. This is the first book in the Mistborn trilogy and everyone has already read this whole trilogy but I finally read it and I thought you'd be interested to know my full thoughts in it. I won't say any spoilers about this book, so don't worry about that. I think the best way to summarize this book is to talk about the world and the magic system more than the plot itself. And in this world, the evil lord, he's called Lord Ruler here, but he's like the evil man in the story, has won and he has been ruling for 1,000 years. So we have the noble people who agrees with the way he's ruling things and they have money and they have everything. And then we have the Ska who are basically slaves and they don't have a lot in this world. So the plot of this book, the idea here is that they want to overthrow the Lord Ruler. The main characters are Vin and Kelsier, and they, together with other characters who also have powers that I'm going to talk about right in a second, they get together to try to overthrow the Lord Ruler. So the magic system in this book is based on metals. There are 8 main metals in the story, which gives the characters who have this power different powers. So normally the people in this world don't have powers, but if they do have powers, they can burn one of the metals. They kind of like ingest it and they burn it inside of them, and it gives them one power. But we also have the Mistborn, who are the characters who can burn all of the metals. And they, of course, are very, very rare. And that's the setting, that's the plot, that's the magic system in this book. Like I said, I'm not going to go into spoilers. This is a very large book, but I feel like saying more than this would already be spoilers. So let's just leave it at that. I will already say that I adored this book. I loved it so much. It was one of my the best books that I've read this year, my favorite books of all time. It's hard to be even a little bit objective when you love a book this much. So to try to give you concrete things to know if you should read this book or not, and what I thought of this book, but also if it would be a good book for you, I'm going to go through my rating system. I use the compile system that was created by G from Book Row, so I'm going to leave her video explaining it in the description. I adapted it a little bit for my rating, but it's pretty much what she does. It separates the book and it gives different ratings for 7 different things, which is character, atmosphere, writing, plot, intrigue, logic, and entertainment. So to start with characters. Here I'm going to say the one tiny negative thing about this book, because the rest I don't have a lot of negative things to say. But about characters, I do think that this is not a diverse cast of characters. We don't have a lot of women that are important in this book, or just other diverse minorities. And that's the one negative thing that I have to say about this book. I think it would make it more interesting, but he succeeded in making it very interesting even without it. Because all of the characters we have here, they are very real. They have a past, they have beliefs, they have motivations that are their own, and even the ones that are in the rebellion, even when they believe in the rebellion, they have other beliefs that are just their own. And we keep learning new things about them all the time. They're not necessarily great characters. Some of them are really just really good, but the way that they do things because of their belief system and because of their goals might be very unexpected and not necessarily completely good for everyone. So I think that's a very interesting way to write good characters, because they really are good. They're not bad people, but they still do things very unexpected ways. One thing that I really love about these characters also is that they are smart. They're actually clever people. I hate it when in books the character like lose a fight or lose something because they're just stupid, or they are making stupid decisions. And here they're actually very clever. So if one loses a fight, it's not because they're not clever, they did something stupid, it's because the other one is just better or the other one is smarter. And I feel like all the characters in this book are very smart. And the last thing about characters that I wanted to say is that the development, especially of Vin, from the beginning to the last page of the book, she's a completely different person. You can see the ways that she develops throughout the whole book. And she starts as an annoying girl, but of course, she has all of her reasons for it. But you can see the small ways that she develops and who she becomes in the end. Now let's go to atmosphere. I really enjoyed the way he described the cities, the locations, the traveling part. I think he leaves enough for the imagination, and he doesn't describe every single thing, but only the things that are relevant for the story. So I don't know exactly what the characters look like or what the setting looks like, but not in a bad way. Like, he gives enough for my imagination to fill the spaces in a way that doesn't impact the story. So I think that's really good, and it makes it very immersive. When it needs more descriptions, for example, when she goes to the balls and the big, beautiful mansions, there's a lot more description of those places. And I think it's a perfect balance of the places where we need a lot of description and when we don't need it. I think he does it really well. And also because there's not a place to talk about the magic system, I'm going to talk here in the atmosphere part. This magic system is it has a lot of rules, and it's very scientific, and I loved it so much. Everything makes so much sense. Like, in the logic aspect of this rating, like, it makes so much sense. And it's also just a lot of fun. All the fights, the way that they use the metals and their powers, the way they impact the metals, it's just, again, it's so clever, both in a character aspect, but also in the writing aspect. And it makes it very immersive and just very fun, because you can see that this would be the real things that the characters would be doing. So overall, it's a great atmosphere with the way the magic system is implemented, with the way it's used, especially in fight scenes, and just overall in the setting and the way this whole world is explained and explored. Now to writing. I think he has one of the most accessible writings that I've ever read. It's just so easy to fly through this book. It's a very, very big book, and I read it in a week. And I was going to mention a lot about how I think his writing, the way he writes, makes it as if we don't pay attention to the writing style. And I just heard recently on Murphy's channel, she mentioned that he said he wants his writing to be invisible, and she doesn't agree that it is invisible, but I haven't read enough of his books to recognize his writing so much. So for me, it did feel invisible, and I think that's the best way to explain it. Like I said, this is not going to be the case for everyone, but for me, he just focuses so much on what is happening and on the characters that we don't pay attention to the writing. So for example, when you're reading Nevernight, it's so flowery, and there's so many comparisons, and like the way that he writes is one of the most important parts of the book. So you all the time, you know that you're reading a book and you pay attention to the words that are on the pages. And here that doesn't happen. Like, you're not paying attention to the words that he's writing, but to what is happening, to the plot, and to what the characters are doing. I think that the most beautiful or most elaborate sentences in this book were actually in dialogues. So it makes sense that this is something that this character would say and not that the author is saying. So for me, that makes it very immersive, because all the time we forget that someone is writing these words. He's just simply telling a story of people saying these beautiful things. I don't know if that makes sense, but it just made me pay attention more to the story and the plot and the characters than the author. And as much as I love flowery writing, I love Nevernight so much, sometimes this is also a good way to read a story. The next aspect is plot, and I already mentioned what the idea of this book is. It's basically a high story with magical powers. So they all get together, each of them has a different magical power. He wants to overthrow the Lord Ruler. It's not the most unique premise in the world, but the way that it's executed and the setting and the magical powers makes it very, very unique. Next is Intrigue, and this is one that I think I consider it a little bit different than the original compile that G created. So for me, plot is the premise of the story, and intrigue is how the story happens. So I think for her it's a little bit different between these two, but basically for me, the way that this premise happens, the way that the plot happens, is just perfect. Things go wrong all the time, and they have to have new ideas, and they have to deal with the things that are going wrong, and everything happens in a way that makes a lot of sense, and they have very clever ideas, and I really like that. But I want to especially highlight the ending of the book. No spoilers, don't worry, but it was perfect. I never thought before I read this book that the ending of the first book in a trilogy could be this good. It was very unexpected for me, just as the first book in a trilogy. It was so satisfying, and it still made me so curious to keep reading. It was the best ending that I've ever read, especially for a first book in a trilogy. And I've heard before that his endings are always really good, and I'm so happy to finally see it and to finally read it and to be part of the people who say that his endings are really good, because it's really good. I've read Warbreaker before. I read it in January, and I went to reread it now already. It was really, really good, but it's supposed to be a standalone. I think it's going to have sequels maybe, but it's supposed to be a standalone. So yes, the ending was awesome, but not necessarily. I was expecting anything more from it, expecting more story from it. But for this one, because I'm expecting the second book is much longer than this, so it was just perfect. Next is logic, and I already mentioned a few times how all of this makes sense to me so much, and how they behave in a way that I think it's real, and I think that they should be behaving. I just imagine, like, this book is so well thought out and so well planned that I just imagine that Brandon Sanderson has a room in his house just with, like, you know, those serial killers rooms that everything's like connected, and you're just trying to make sense of everything. He must have a room for each of his books, just with everything planned on the walls, because everything fits and it makes sense, and it's just very well planned. And the last one is entertainment. I love this book. I want to keep reading the series. I want to read all of his books. I want to reread Warbreaker. It's now one of my favorite books of all time. It was one of my favorite books that I read this year. The favorite book maybe that I read this year. I don't have more to say about entertainment. I was very, very entertained. 10 out of 10 in the score, in my rating. I was entertained. One more thing that I want to add about this book is that a lot of people compares this to Six of Crows. And I was worried because I didn't like Six of Crows. And when I was right in the beginning of it, I was like, this is exactly what I wanted Six of Crows to be. Of course, based on my taste in books, this is much more fast-paced, and there's a lot more plot than Six of Crows. Basically, both are just high stories and people getting together. Six of Crows, some have powers or just things that they do better than the others. This is everything that Six of Crows wasn't for me, is in this book. So if you didn't like Six of Crows, but you like the idea of a high story, read The Final Empire. This made me dislike Six of Crows even more, because now I know what it could have been. So, yeah. When they say, like, if you like this book, read this book, I would say if you didn't like Six of Crows, read Mistborn. I probably forgot a lot of things. I had a lot of thoughts as I was reading this book, so I probably don't remember everything that I wanted to say, but I will just leave you with, this is a very fast-paced book, plot-driven, with awesome characters, very well developed, very immersive, so accessible. Don't be afraid of how big it is. Awesome world building, awesome magic system. I will probably be talking about this book a lot in my channel. It will definitely be on the best of the year. And it's just a really, really fun adventure that I recommend to everyone who likes any type of fantasy stories. Let me know if you'd like me to do a review of books 2 and 3 as well, and when I read it. I can do it both spoiler-free and with spoilers of this one, or something like that. But I will probably also have a lot of thoughts on them. Please leave a comment, let me know what you thought of Mistborn, if you've read it, The Final Empire. And if you haven't read it yet, if I convinced you a little bit to read it, because that's my whole goal for this video. Remember to like and subscribe, and thank you so much for joining me.